In this video, I'm going to be teaching you the 7 lessons I learned from Dave Ramsey about mixing music. So let's dive right in. The first lesson that I learned from Dave Ramsey about mixing is kids do what feels good. Mixing with an ego is the number one way to fail at mixing your song well. Avoiding things that make you feel less than superior or basically not as good, then those are usually the ways that we can grow as mixing engineers, but if we avoid those, we're essentially acting like a kid, and therefore we're not going to ever get hurt, and we're not going to feel bad about our mixes, because ultimately that's what truly matters, right? Is that we feel good about our mixes. It doesn't matter that they're not professional. It just matters that we feel good about what we just did. But basically, ignoring the lessons that the pros do, so things that the professionals really focus on, like volume balance, the sonic balance, focus on proper EQ technique and compression, not over compressing things that are very obvious that the pros focus on and give a disproportionate amount of effort into their mixes, we ignore completely and we just jump straight to the effects because the effects is what makes us feel good. So kids do what feels good. And then the next one, number 2, is adults make a plan and stick to it, right? So this is actually a single quote, right? Kids do what feels good. Adults make a plan and stick to it. Adults show up and identify where they're going to go in their mix before they actually start mixing. We choose references of what we're actually aiming for in our mix so that we know there's an objective measure of have I reached there or not within my mix. Like along with that, you choose a vibe. Is this going to be more of like an indie mix where, I kind of let things ride dynamically, or is it going to be very polished, more like a pop mix where everything is very incredibly dynamically stable, very clean, etc. Those are two very different vibes that you could go into if you wanted to. However, it's going to determine you as the adult in your mixing process to make sure that you're actually choosing a direction and then sticking to it. Because if you change direction halfway through because you don't feel like finishing the mix the way it is, then all of a sudden your mix is going to sound amateur immediately because it was obvious that you had no real direction in your mix. Make sure you're emphasizing what's actually great about the track. Sometimes there's a really cool guitar part and also a really cool vocal part. You got to pick one, right? Pick whichever one's going to be the main one. The other one's going to be some ear candy in a section of the song. So you need to be very cognizant of exactly what you're doing the entire way through the song and know exactly what you're going to be emphasizing all the way through the song. Otherwise, your listeners are going to be confused. Number 3, if you live like no one else today, then you can live like no one else later. This comes down to the effort and sacrifice that people are willing to put forth to learn the skill of mixing. The people who actually learned how to mix professionally did 2 things. Number 1 is they invested in education. Not necessarily invested in education in buying a course. While that could be the case, that was my journey into professional mixing. Another way to invest in education is to intern somewhere and sacrifice with your time to get access to a mentor to get mentored on how to do this thing well. And so I don't know anyone who didn't have some sort of Gandalf figure in their life teaching them how to do this well and ultimately still ending up with a professional result. I don't know anyone who was like completely self-taught and still ended up with really professional mixes and an abundant career. I am sure that there is somebody out there, so you leave the exceptions down below. Don't assume that you are always the exception. Assume that you are the norm. If you assume that you're the norm, that means that you need mentorship and help in getting a professional mix, learning the skill of professional mixing. The second thing that all professionals do at some point in their life is they dedicate time into learning how to mix well. And not only do they acquire the knowledge of how to do it, but they're also dedicated to actually implementing and practicing what they're learning throughout the entire process. So if you have those 2 things, then you are going to win. You will be able to mix like a professional, but most people are either too heavy on one side of that or they are too lazy to do either one of them. You have to sacrifice, in essence, your time and or your money to be able to do this thing. And if you're not willing to make that sacrifice, you won't learn how to mix like a professional. That's just the reality of any skill that you want to learn. Or just treat it like a hobby. And if it's just a hobby to you, that's completely fine. But I would encourage you, if you really want to take this seriously, you got to do one or both of those things. Number 4 lesson I learned from Dave Ramsey is change is painful. Few people have the courage to seek out change. Most people won't change until the pain of where they are exceeds the pain of changing. So this comes back a lot to references, make us feel bad, and so we don't want to use them in our mixes because inherently it's like our mix isn't as good as the reference, and so I don't. Basically, real feedback is painful. Getting real feedback on your mixes, getting real feedback on your songs that's negative, that's constructive, that's critical, is often very painful because it essentially reveals the flaws that we already knew were there, but we just didn't, weren't able to articulate them. But on the flip side, real feedback is the thing that's going to make the difference in your songs. It's going to make the difference in you actually moving forward as a mixing engineer. It's going to help you get better with your songs, with your productions, with your mixing skill. And so by avoiding real feedback, yes, you're avoiding pain, but you're also avoiding growth. Growth is almost always uncomfortable, and you have to lean into that if you truly want to grow. Number 5 is study the habits of people that you want to be like and imitate them. If they are winning, they must be doing something right. This is very similar to the mentor conversation that we were just having. Basically, if you want to mix like somebody, find out what they are doing and not just like using the same plugins they are or using the same mixing techniques necessarily that they are. Look at how they got to where they are. Look at the time and sacrifice that they spent in order to get the skill that they currently possess. That's really what this is after. It's not necessarily about their specific mixing techniques. While those have a place, they're not the majority. The majority is they put in the time to learn the thing well to be at a professional level. And if you want to be a professional like they are, then you have to do the same thing that they did. The other thing I would add in here is stay humble. If you truly want to grow and you're not where you're at yet, stay humble and recognize you still have things to learn. You'll never reach that level if you don't learn things. So if you are prideful about your mixing skill, then you're not open to constructive feedback. You won't be actually open to learning those lessons that's actually going to move your mixing forward. Number 6 is work is doing it, discipline is doing it every day, and diligence is doing it well every day. So when you show up to mix every single day, if you're really trying to work on your mixing skill, going through the motions is only half the battle, right? You can show up and do the thing every single day, but if you're not actually pushing yourself, if you're not actually learning the lessons that are set before you with each set of multi-tracks that you're mixing, then you're not actually going to move forward and truly be a world-class or even professional mixing engineer. You need to learn the lessons that each song has for you to be able to move forward. And that means diligence is doing it well every single day, actually putting in the hard effort of putting forth the time and the energy to truly do everything at the best quality you possibly can at your current level. There's been a lot of research on how to improve skills, and it's almost always seeking after those things that are about 10 to 15% harder than you currently have the skill to do. By just pushing yourself a little bit more each and every single time, then you're ultimately going to end up with way better results in the end in terms of your skill and how much it's improved over the last, few months. This is also to take into account following workflows, right? If you do something different every single time you sit down and mix a song, you're never going to be consistent enough to improve that process. So following a singular workflow is one of the biggest levers that I can tell you in order to be able to mix like a professional and improve your skill over time. If you want to find out what my workflow is, then I recorded that in the Ultimate Mixing Checklist right below this video. There's the link there if you want to check that out. Completely free, completely for you. Let's move on to number 7. Number 7 is being willing to delay pleasure for a greater result is a sign of maturity. If you want to truly be mature in your mixing skill, then you have to suck for a while. And by hiding the fact that you actually suck at mixing, then you're delaying your growth more and more. So essentially, if you want to be able to actually reach that pro level, then you're going to actually have to put in some effort for a little while to actually get there. You can learn mixing really fast, though, if you put in the actual effort it takes to learn it. I generally teach my students how to mix professionally and get 80% of the way there within the first 30 days of their education, because it's not really that hard if you know the right skills and the right process to follow. But most people delay that first 80% by years by not seeking out that help and or a consistent workflow that takes discipline to follow. Hopefully some of those stuck out to you and you're like, oh, I am definitely going to be doing that in the future. With that said, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video.